Under the blazing Wyoming sun, a ruthless millionaire dared the world with $1 million bet. No man alive could ride the black Mustang named Ironheart. Cowboys fell, pride shattered, and the crowd roared with cruel laughter, until a thin, barefoot boy in a frayed straw hat stepped into the arena. What happened next silenced a town and changed a family's destiny forever. The evening sun sank low over the Wyoming plains, painting the horizon in streaks of copper and rose. The air smelled of dust, whiskey, and anticipation as guests gathered on the wide porch of Silver Creek Ranch, one of the grandest spreads in the state. Lanterns flickered against the broad beams of the barn, and laughter rolled from groups of ranchers, oilmen, and townsfolk who had come not only to eat and drink, but to witness whatever spectacle William Harlan had planned. William stood above them all on the balcony of his mansion, a glass of bourbon in one hand, his other gripping the iron railing like a man determined to remind everyone whose land they stood on. At 60, he was still tall, lean, his hair gone to silver, but his eyes sharp as a hawk's. He was a man who believed money and willpower could bend anything: the land, the people, even the wild itself. Below, men in dusty hats swapped bets and stories. Some whispered about the black Mustang that had been locked in a reinforced corral for weeks. They'd heard the horse's screams at night, had seen the clouds of dust when it hurled itself against steel bars. They called it Ironheart. To most it was less a horse than a storm trapped in flesh and blood. William raised his glass, and the chatter stilled. His voice, deep and commanding, carried over the courtyard. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "you've come here tonight for more than a meal. You've come to see something no one has dared before. That beast out there, and that black devil of a Mustang, has thrown every rider I've put on him. Cowboys, rodeo champions, men who swore they could ride lightning itself. They all limped away broken. And yet I tell you this, everything in this world has a price, even a wild heart." He paused, savoring the silence, then lifted his hand. $1 million, he declared. Cash. To the man who can ride Ironheart and break him here on my land. The crowd erupted, shouts of disbelief, laughter, curses thrown into the twilight. $1 million was a fortune that could buy a ranch, pay off debts, start a new life. Men elbowed one another, some already stepping forward, their pride louder than their fear. Women gasped, clutching children who stared wide-eyed at the promise of danger. William's grin stretched thin and cold. He drank from his glass, his voice cutting through the noise. "You think I jest? Step forward and you'll see. The pen waits, and so does your fortune, if you've got the guts." From the distance came a sound like thunder, though the sky was clear. Ironheart struck, against the steel fence, his hooves echoing like cannon fire. The Mustang reared, mane whipping in the fading light, eyes burning as if lit from within. Even the bravest in the crowd took an uneasy step back. A hush swept over the ranch yard, broken only by the horse's furious cries. William's eyes gleamed with triumph. He had baited them with greed, dared them with pride, and bound them to a game they could not resist. As the first cowboy swaggered toward the corral, the crowd leaned forward, hungry for spectacle. No one noticed the boy lingering in the shadows near the kitchen door, a bucket in his hands, his bare feet coated in dust. Sam Walker's dark eyes fixed on the Mustang, and something in his chest stirred. The horse's rage wasn't madness. It was pain. Sam knew it the way some boys know the sound of their own heartbeat. He tightened his grip on the bucket, unnoticed in the growing roar of the crowd, and whispered under his breath as if the Mustang might hear him across the distance. "They'll never understand you. But maybe I do." The crowd cheered as the gate swung wide, and the storm was unleashed. The next morning broke clear and sharp, the Wyoming sky an endless sheet of blue stretching from one mountain ridge to another. But at Silver Creek Ranch, the air was thick with something heavier than weather: anticipation, pride, and a creeping unease. By dawn, the dirt road leading to the ranch was clogged with trucks and horse trailers, their chrome glinting as men in worn boots and dusty hats gathered like moths to a flame. $1 million hung in the air, and greed had a way of drowning out caution. The corral stood at the center of it all, a cage of steel and timber reinforced after too many broken rails. Dust clung to its posts, kicked up from the restless pacing of the Mustang inside. Ironheart circled like a predator, his black coat shimmering with sweat even in the cool morning air. He tossed his head, bared his teeth, and struck at the ground with hooves that cracked the earth like hammers. Each movement was violence wrapped in muscle, and yet there was something else, something that made even the hardest cowboys hesitate. The horse wasn't merely wild. He was wounded, betrayed, and unyielding. On the balcony of the ranch house, William Harlan surveyed the scene as if he were a king presiding over gladiators. He wore a pressed vest and polished boots, every detail a reminder of the fortune he controlled. To him, Ironheart was not an animal to be respected. He was a trophy waiting to be claimed, a storm to be bent beneath his will. William thrived on the murmurs of the crowd, the wagers scribbled on scrap paper, the nervous laughter when a man was thrown. This was his stage, and cruelty was his entertainment. The first challenger stepped forward, a rodeo veteran named Clay Whitman. He had the swagger of a man who'd tasted both glory and dust, his scars worn like badges of honor. The crowd hushed as he climbed the rail and dropped into the pen, rope coiled tight, hat pulled low. For a breath, the air held still. Ironheart froze, nostrils flaring, eyes locked on the intruder. Then the storm broke loose. The Mustang launched upward, twisting with a fury that seemed too powerful for flesh. Dust exploded, ropes snapped taut, and within seconds Clay was airborne, hurled across the corral like a rag doll. He hit the ground hard, his cry swallowed by the roar of the crowd. Some cheered, others winced, but William only smirked and raised his glass of coffee. "Another fool with more pride than sense," he muttered, loud enough for those nearest to hear. By noon, half a dozen men had tried their hand. Some lasted seconds, others barely managed to mount before being flung. One limped away, clutching his ribs, another was carried out unconscious. The failures piled up like kindling, feeding the fire of the crowd's excitement. Vendors set up along the fence line, selling jerky, lemonade, and whiskey as if it were a county fair. Children clutched their fathers' hands, wide-eyed at the spectacle, while old ranchers muttered that no good could come from tempting fate with money and arrogance. Ironheart stood at the center of it all, sides heaving, sweat darkening his black coat to near obsidian. His mane whipped across his eyes as he stamped and snorted, but there was no sign of surrender. If anything, the beast grew stronger with each failed attempt, as though feeding on the frustration of the men who tried to break him. He was more than an untamed horse. He was defiance given form. In the crowd, Sam Walker lingered at the edge, half hidden by the press of bodies. His bare feet pressed into the dust, his hands clutched nervously at the brim of his straw hat. He watched each man fall, his chest tightening not with excitement, but with sorrow. He saw what others did not: the flick of Ironheart's ears, the wild whites of his eyes, the desperate flinch that came not from hatred, but from fear. Sam knew that look. He'd seen it in stray dogs cornered by boys with sticks, in the eyes of calves dragged too soon from their mothers. Ironheart wasn't a demon. He was a prisoner. The crowd gasped as another rider was thrown, this one a young buck from Cheyenne who had bragged all morning about his grit. He landed face first in the dirt, his pride scattering with the dust. As the medics rushed in, William leaned forward on the balcony, his smile stretching cruel. "Remember this day," he called down, his voice slicing through the noise. "Remember that horse, and remember that there are some things in this world only a Harlan can master." A murmur rippled through the onlookers, half awe, half unease. Some laughed along, eager to stay in William's favor. Others shifted, their gazes lowering, uneasy with the arrogance that dripped from his words. Still, none spoke against him. William Harlan was too powerful, too untouchable. Ironheart lifted his head, toward the horizon then, his chest heaving, his cry tearing through the air like a blade. The sound silenced even the vendors, even the children tugging at their fathers' sleeves. It was not the cry of a beast defeated. It was a proclamation, a vow that he would not be broken. Some in the crowd shivered, sensing something larger at play, something beyond money or pride. Sam's small hand clenched tighter around his hat. He felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders, a weight he was too young to carry, yet could not refuse. He didn't know how or when, but he knew with a clarity that frightened him. One day soon, it would be him stepping into that corral. And when that day came, the world would never be the same. The sun had begun its slow descent, laying long shadows across the fields of Silver Creek Ranch when Sam Walker trudged down the dusty path behind the cookhouse. His small frame carried the weight of a bucket of water, sloshing with each step, but his mind was elsewhere. Every cry of Ironheart from the corral still rang in his ears, each thundering hoofbeat echoing in his chest. The boy could not shake the feeling that the horse's fury wasn't just madness, it was a plea. Sam was 13, but looked younger, his frame lean from chores, his skin browned by long hours under the Wyoming sun. His straw hat, frayed at the edges, had once belonged to his father. Though patched and worn, it was his most treasured possession, a reminder of the man he could barely remember. He set the bucket down and sat on the step of the cookhouse, staring at the horizon where the ranch stretched into rolling plains. His mother, Mary, appeared in the doorway with a dish towel in her hand, her face tired, but kind. "You've been out there all day, haven't you?" she asked, brushing back a lock of hair that had escaped her bun. "Watching that madness." Sam didn't answer at first. He toyed with the rim of his hat, his gaze fixed on the dust swirling in the distance. Finally, he said softly, "They don't understand him, Mama. They think he's a monster, but he's not. He's just scared." Mary sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "Scared or not, that horse has put men in the dirt. Broken bones, Sam. You saw what happened today. Don't fool yourself into thinking you can fix what no one else can." Sam lifted his eyes to hers, a quiet fire burning in them. Maybe they can't, but I can. Her heart clenched. She saw so much of his father in him. The stubborn streak, the quiet courage. His father had died in a corral not unlike this one, trampled during a training gone wrong, and Mary had sworn her son would never walk the same path. Yet here he was, drawn to danger the way a moth is drawn to flame. She crouched down, gripping his shoulders. "Promise me, Sam. Promise you won't even think about stepping in there." He hesitated. The truth balanced on the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't lie to her. Instead, he lowered his eyes and said nothing. Silence was easier than a broken promise. That night, as the ranch settled into uneasy quiet, Sam lay awake on his cot in the small room behind the kitchen. Moonlight spilled across the wooden floorboards, pale and cold. Outside, Ironheart screamed again, the sound tearing through the stillness. Sam sat up, heart pounding. He crept to the window and looked out toward the corral. In the silver glow, he saw the horse pacing, tossing his mane like a storm trapped in a bottle. For a moment, their eyes seemed to meet across the distance. Sam pressed his hand against the glass. "I know," he whispered. "I know what it's like to be trapped." The next morning, Sam rose before dawn. The ranch was still, the only sounds the lowing of cattle and the creak of the windmill turning lazily in the breeze. He slipped on his straw hat and headed to the barn to fetch feed for the chickens, but his steps slowed as he neared the corral. Ironheart stood at the far side, his head lowered, sides heaving as though the fight had drained him. Sam leaned against the rail, careful not to make sudden movements. "Hey, fella," he murmured, his voice steady, almost like a lullaby. "You don't know me, but I know you're tired. I can see it in your eyes." The horse flicked an ear toward him, nostrils flaring. Sam stayed still, letting the silence stretch, then slowly held out his hand, palm open. The distance between them was too great for Ironheart to reach, but the gesture mattered. It was trust offered freely. After a moment, the horse turned away, but not with the violent snap Sam had expected. Instead, Ironheart snorted, pawed the ground, and returned to pacing. "Thought I'd find you here." The voice startled Sam. He spun to see Jake Turner, the rodeo veteran, leaning heavily on the fence with his arm in a sling. His face was lined with pain and bitterness. "You think you're the first kid to feel sorry for that devil? Don't be fooled. That horse will tear you apart just like the rest of us." Sam frowned. "He's not the devil. He just needs someone to listen." Jake barked a laugh, bitter and sharp. "Listen? Boy, I've been thrown by broncs since before you were born. Some animals don't listen. They only break." He tapped his sling with his good hand. "And if you're stupid enough to try, you'll end up worse than me." Sam swallowed, the weight of Jake's words pressing down, but it didn't snuff out the fire inside him. If anything, it fanned the flames. He looked back at Ironheart, who had stopped pacing and was staring at them both. "I don't think he'll break," Sam said quietly. "Not if you treat him right." Jake shook his head and limped away, muttering curses under his breath. Sam stayed by the fence a little longer, watching the Mustang's restless movements. He didn't have the strength or the skill the cowboys boasted, but he had something else: patience and a heart that refused to see only fury where others saw a monster. As the day wore on, the ranch buzzed with talk of new challengers. Men from across Wyoming and even Montana were arriving, lured by the promise of wealth and glory. William Harlan relished every moment, striding through the yard like a general preparing for war. He cared nothing for the broken bones or the battered pride left in Ironheart's wake. For him, it was a game. For Sam, it was a calling. That evening, when the lanterns flickered on and the laughter from the ranch house spilled into the night, Sam sat with his mother on the porch of their small cabin. She rocked in her chair, her eyes heavy with worry, while Sam stared at the stars. "They all think Ironheart can't be tamed," he said softly. "But maybe he doesn't need to be tamed. Maybe he just needs a friend." Mary looked at him, her heart twisting with both pride and dread. "Sam, some storms can't be calmed. They just have to pass." Sam turned his gaze back to the dark horizon, where the silhouette of the corral cut against the night sky. His jaw tightened. "Maybe. But some storms are worth standing in." Ironheart's cry split the darkness once more, and this time Sam didn't flinch. He felt it in his bones. His path was already set. The wind howled across the plains that evening, carrying with it the sharp scent of sagebrush and dust. The ranch was quieter than usual after another brutal day in the corral. Men had been thrown hard, one carried away with his leg bent at an angle that silenced even the loudest braggarts. Lanterns glowed dimly in the bunkhouse windows, but laughter was scarce. Pride had been humbled again and again by the black Mustang pacing in the steel pen. In the small cabin behind the cookhouse, Mary Walker stirred a pot of beans over the wood stove. The room smelled of smoke and onions, familiar comforts after long days of toil. Sam sat at the rough-hewn table, his straw hat resting on his lap, staring at the knot in the wooden surface, as though it held the answers to questions he couldn't voice aloud. His mother studied him in silence for a moment, then set the spoon down with a soft clatter. "Sam," she said, her voice steady but low, "you've been watching that horse too closely. I see it in your eyes. Promise me you'll stay away from that pen." Sam lifted his gaze. The lamplight caught the determination in his dark eyes, but also the vulnerability of a boy caught between childhood and something much heavier. "Mama," he said, almost whispering, "when I look at him, I don't see rage. I see pain, like he's carrying something no one else can understand." Mary crossed the room, knelt beside him, and placed her hands on his. Her fingers were calloused from years of hard work, but her touch was tender. "Your daddy once said the same about a bronc he was trying to break. He swore he could calm it, that all it needed was patience. But patience wasn't enough. Sam, that horse killed him. Do you understand? It trampled the life right out of him. And it left me with you, a baby in my arms, and a hole in my heart I've never been able to fill." The words settled heavy in the room. Sam's throat tightened. He remembered fragments of his father. A deep laugh, the smell of leather, the shadow of a man leaning against a fence. But mostly, he remembered the emptiness his absence left. Hearing how it happened, hearing the truth Mary rarely spoke of, made his chest ache. "I don't want to lose you too," Mary whispered, tears brightening her eyes. "Don't let that horse be the end of you." Sam squeezed her hands, but he couldn't force the promise she wanted. Instead, he nodded slowly, a gesture that brought her a small comfort, though it was no real assurance. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the restless wind outside. Later that night, when Mary had gone to bed, Sam lay awake on his cot, staring at the ceiling. The house groaned softly in the wind. Then it came, the piercing cry of Ironheart, echoing across the fields. Sam sat up, his heart hammering. He could almost feel the vibrations in his bones, as if the horse's call was aimed directly at him. Unable to resist, he slipped outside. The night air was cold, filled with the earthy smell of rain that hadn't fallen. The moon hung low, casting a pale glow over the land. Sam walked barefoot through the dirt, past the quiet barns, until the corral loomed before him. Ironheart paced within, his black coat glistening in the moonlight, his mane wild and untamed. For a long moment, boy and horse simply stared at each other. Sam gripped the rail, his breath clouding in the chill air. "You're not the monster they say," he whispered. "You're just trapped. Like I've been all my life." The Mustang stopped, ears flicking toward him. His breath rose in great clouds, his eyes catching the moonlight like burning coals. Sam felt no fear, only a strange, steady calm. He didn't move, didn't try to reach out, only stood there, letting the silence stretch. Suddenly, footsteps crunched in the dirt behind him. Sam whirled to see Jake Turner limping out of the shadows, his arm still bound in a sling. The older man's face was etched with weariness and pain. "You're a fool, boy," Jake said, his voice low but harsh. "I know that look in your eyes. You think you can do what no one else can. But I'm telling you, Ironheart will break you, just like he broke me, just like he's broken every man who's tried." Sam swallowed hard, torn between respect and defiance. Maybe you all came at him wrong. Maybe he doesn't need to be beaten into giving up. Jake shook his head, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "That's the kind of talk that gets you buried young. I've been around enough horses to know when one's got the devil in him, and that one," he jabbed his good hand toward the pen. "He's not meant for saddles. He's meant for dust and bones." With that, Jake turned and limped away, leaving Sam alone with the echoes of his warning. Sam turned back to the corral. Ironheart had resumed his pacing, but slower now, his eyes softer, less like fire, and more like something Sam couldn't name. The boy gripped the rail tighter, whispering into the wind. "I don't believe you're meant to destroy. I believe you're meant to be free." The Mustang paused, nostrils flaring, then let out a long, weary breath. Sam felt it deep in his chest, like a secret passed between them. The night stretched on, and with it grew the weight of choices Sam could not escape. Somewhere inside, he knew his path was no longer his to avoid. It was already tied to the black stallion pacing behind the steel rails, the beast the world had written off as a demon. And though fear lingered, so too did something stronger, an unshakable pull toward the storm waiting in the night. Morning broke over Silver Creek Ranch with a blaze of light, the sun climbing high and hot, as if determined to burn away the shadows of the night before. The ranch was alive with motion, more alive than it had been in years. Wagons rolled in, engines of old trucks rattled, and men in wide-brimmed hats filled the yard. Women fanned themselves against the rising heat, while children clambered on fences to get a better look at the day's promised spectacle. William Harlan had stirred not just a challenge, but a frenzy, and the promise of $1 million made the dust taste sweet on greedy tongues. The corral at the center of it all gleamed like a prison built for giants. Its posts had been reinforced after too many splintered rails, its gates heavy as iron. Within, Ironheart pawed at the earth, his breath snorting in heavy bursts. His black coat glistened as though hammered from steel, muscles shifting beneath like living thunder. He was a vision of raw defiance, and every time he struck the ground with his hooves, the crowd murmured as though the earth itself trembled. On the porch of the grand house, William Harlan stood tall in his tailored vest, a glass of bourbon already in his hand despite the hour. His voice boomed above the crowd, soaked in arrogance and pride. "Today," he declared, "we find out which man among you has the grit to conquer what no one else has. $1 million waits for the rider who can master Ironheart. 1 million, here in my hands, ready to make a legend of the man brave enough to seize it." The crowd roared, but not all with enthusiasm. Among the ranch hands who leaned against the fence, mutters of doubt threaded through the cheers. They had seen Ironheart's eyes, the fire that lived in them, and they knew this was not just another horse to be broken. Still, the weight of the wager pressed hard against common sense, and men were willing to gamble bones for fortune. The first challenger was a tall cowboy from Texas, lean and sunburnt, with hands that bore the scars of too many rodeos. He swung into the pen, tossing his hat to the dust. The crowd held its breath as the gate clanged shut. For an instant, the Mustang and the man regarded each other in silence. Then Ironheart lunged, rearing with such violence the cowboy barely had time to grasp his rope. Dust exploded. A heartbeat later, the man was airborne, hurled clear over the rail like a rag doll. He hit the ground outside the pen, the breath knocked from him, while the crowd erupted in a mixture of laughter, gasps, and applause. By midday, 3 more men had tried, and 3 more had fallen. One staggered away, clutching his arm. Another limped with blood running from his temple. William Harlan only laughed louder, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Is this the best Wyoming has to offer? $1 million for any man with courage, yet all I see are cowards in boots." At the edge of the crowd, Sam Walker pressed his straw hat tighter against his head, his heart thundering in rhythm with the stallion's fury. He watched each attempt, each failure, not with the thrill of a spectator, but with the ache of someone who understood. He saw the whites of Ironheart's eyes, the rolling panic behind the violence, the way his ears flicked at every shout. This wasn't just rebellion, it was fear. Deep and festering, a wound that no whip or rope could heal. Jake Turner stood nearby, his arm in a sling, his face drawn in both pain and bitterness. He leaned close to Sam, his voice rough. "You're watching too close, boy. You'll get ideas in your head, and that horse will make sure they kill you." Sam didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on the stallion. The Mustang reared again, slamming against the rail so hard the posts shuddered. Dust rained down from the beams, and the crowd shrieked with both terror and delight. Then a hush fell as the next challenger climbed the fence. He was older, broader in the shoulders, with a calmness that unsettled those who'd been laughing. The man was a rancher from Montana, known for breaking broncs in record time. He tipped his hat at William, then dropped into the pen. The crowd leaned forward as if pulled by the gravity of the moment. For a while, it looked as though this man might succeed. He moved slower, more deliberate, his rope looping carefully. He whispered words no one could hear, his body swaying with practiced rhythm. Ironheart stilled, his nostrils flaring, his ears twitching. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Perhaps at last, the beast had met his match. But Ironheart was not like other horses. With a sudden explosive twist, he bucked sideways, ripping the rope from the man's hands. His hooves lashed out, narrowly missing the rancher's head, and the man fell hard, scrambling for safety as Ironheart bore down on him with teeth bared. The handlers rushed in, dragging the man clear, while the Mustang thundered against the rails, screaming his defiance to the sky. The crowd erupted into chaos, some shouting encouragement, others muttering prayers. William Harlan raised his glass high, smiling as though the chaos were the sweetest symphony. 1,000,000, he called again. Who among you dares next? Sam's chest tightened. Around him, the men shifted uneasily, glancing at one another but not stepping forward. He could feel the moment building like a storm, pressing down on him until his breath came shallow. His mother's warning from the night before echoed in his ears, yet so did the Mustang's cries. As the sun climbed higher and the dust thickened in the air, the arena of the strong revealed more than broken men. It revealed the truth. Ironheart could not be mastered by brute force, by pride, or by money. Yet the crowd was blind to it, swept up in greed and arrogance. Only Sam saw what truly burned in the horse's eyes. And though his hands trembled, deep inside him a quiet voice whispered the certainty he could not yet speak aloud. One day, it would be him stepping into that pen. And when he did, the world would see something no wager could ever buy. By the third day, the crowds at Silver Creek Ranch had swelled beyond anything William Harlan had imagined. Trucks and wagons lined the road for nearly a mile, spilling into the fields. Vendors sold fried pies and watered-down whiskey, and children perched on their fathers' shoulders to see over the crush of bodies. The corral stood like a stage at the center of a carnival, and Ironheart was its unwilling star. Every cry from his throat was met with gasps, laughter, or wagers shouted across the dust-filled air. The Mustang had thrown nearly a dozen men by now, leaving behind a trail of bruises and broken pride. Some were carried away limping, others cursing William's name under their breath, but all left defeated. And still, William's grin only widened. He thrived on the spectacle, on the humbling of men who thought themselves invincible. He raised his glass again and again, reminding the crowd of the $1,000,000 prize as if dangling raw meat before wolves. Sam Walker stood at the far end of the fence, his straw hat clutched tight against his chest. He had been there from the first attempt that morning, his eyes never leaving Ironheart. Every buck, every twist, every strike of hooves into the dirt cut into him like a blade. But it wasn't fear that gripped him. It was sorrow. He saw the terror beneath the stallion's fury, the way his body trembled before the violence, as though fighting not only men, but the ghosts of whatever had scarred him before. As the sun sank toward noon, another challenger stepped forward, a man from Colorado known for his skill with broncs. The crowd cheered as he climbed the rail and dropped inside. Dust rose with every step of the Mustang, his ears flat against his skull, his eyes burning like coals. The cowboy tightened his grip on the rope. His jaw clenched. Then the gate opened and time fractured into chaos. Ironheart launched skyward, twisting so violently the air itself seemed to shatter. The cowboy clung for 2 desperate seconds before he was hurled high, landing with a thud that silenced even the boldest voices. He lay still, groaning, as handlers rushed to drag him clear. Ironheart thundered in circles, kicking up clouds of dust so thick the crowd could barely see. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The Mustang stood in the center of the pen, sides heaving, nostrils flared, his black coat streaked with sweat. The world outside the fence held its breath. No laughter, no cheers, only silence. It was as though the earth itself paused. waiting for something unseen. Sam's hand tightened around the rail. The silence wasn't empty. It was holy, heavy with meaning. Ironheart lifted his head toward the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the sea of faces, daring them to look into his soul. For the first time, people saw not a beast, but something deeper. A creature wronged, betrayed, and yet unbroken. A murmur rippled through the spectators, softer this time, uncertain. William Harlan broke the spell with a bark of laughter. "What's the matter with you all? Afraid of shadows? He's just a horse. $1 million for any man with the guts to try." His words cracked the silence, but their arrogance felt smaller now, brittle against the weight of the moment. Sam stepped back from the fence, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the stallion's breath. He knew, without question, that Ironheart had seen him there, had marked him among the sea of faces. And Sam had felt something stir inside him in return, an understanding that went beyond words, beyond fear. He turned and walked slowly back toward the cookhouse, his mother's warning still echoing in his ears. But deep in his heart, he carried the certainty of what the silence had revealed. The storm inside Ironheart wasn't his to fear. It was his to answer. That night, the ranch yard was alive with drunken laughter and clinking glasses, but Sam sat alone on the steps of the cabin, the stars wheeling above him. Every so often, a cry rang out from the corral, but it no longer sounded like rage to him. It sounded like a call. He whispered into the dark, the words barely stirring the air. "I hear you." And somewhere across the yard, Ironheart stilled, his ears flicking toward the voice carried on the night wind. By the time the 7th morning dawned, Silver Creek Ranch had become a festival ground. Dusty cars and horse trailers crowded the hillsides, vendors hollered about hot coffee and fried dough, and the bleachers groaned under the weight of spectators who had traveled from 3 states just to see the Black Mustang throw another man. Newspapers had begun to cover the story, and a photographer from Cheyenne had set up his camera near the rail, ready to capture the moment a legend either fell or triumphed. William Harlan basked in it all. He strutted through the crowd in polished boots, his silver hair gleaming in the sun, his tailored coat pressed sharp despite the dust. Every nod of respect, every whisper of his name filled him with the same pride as the bourbon in his flask. This was his kingdom, and Ironheart was his crown jewel, a beast that made men quake and kept William's power gleaming. Yet beneath the cheers and laughter, a quiet unease lingered. Too many had tried and failed. Too many had left the corral broken, bloodied, or humiliated. Whispers moved through the crowd. Maybe no one could tame him. Maybe Ironheart wasn't just another horse. Sam Walker felt those whispers sink deep into his bones. He stood near the back of the arena, his bare feet coated in dust, his straw hat shading eyes that never left the Mustang. He had watched every attempt, every fall, and he carried each failure like a stone in his chest. But he also carried something else, the memory of that silence, the moment when Ironheart had stilled and the world had held its breath. It had spoken to him, though no one else seemed to hear. When the announcer's voice cracked across the yard, calling for the next brave soul, a strange calm settled over Sam. His legs moved before his mind could catch up. He stepped from the shadows, pushing through the crowd until gasps rippled outward. A boy, thin, dusty, barefoot, walking toward the corral with the certainty of someone twice his age. "Look at this," someone shouted. "The kitchen boy thinks he can ride." Laughter erupted, sharp and cruel, yet Sam didn't flinch. His small shoulders squared, his chin lifted, and he walked with a steadiness that silenced some of the jeers. On the balcony, William Harlan's laughter cut through like thunder. "Well, isn't this something? A child come to claim a man's prize." He raised his glass, grinning wide. "Let him in. If nothing else, it will be entertaining to watch him run crying back to his mama." Sam climbed the rail slowly, the wood hot beneath his hands. The crowd fell into a hush of disbelief and anticipation. Mary's voice rose from the back, desperate and breaking. "Sam!" "No." But her words were swallowed by the roar of the onlookers, by the grinding creak of the gate swinging open. Inside the pen, Ironheart pawed at the ground, ears flat, eyes wild. Dust swirled between them like smoke from a fire. Sam walked forward step by step, his heartbeat thundering in his chest. He lifted his hands, palms open, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's all right," he said, words meant for no ears but the horses. "I'm not here to hurt you. I know you're angry. I'd be angry too, but you're not alone anymore." The stallion froze. His nostrils flared, his chest heaved, but he did not charge. The silence that had once stretched across the ranch yard returned, heavy and holy. Every man, woman, and child leaned forward, breath caught, as if the world itself had paused to see what would happen. Sam took another step, then another. When he was close enough, he slowly raised his hand and brushed it against Ironheart's neck. The horse shuddered, but did not recoil. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. With movements as careful as prayer, Sam gathered the stallion's mane and pulled himself onto the broad back. For an instant, the air was razor-thin, ready to shatter into chaos. Everyone expected Ironheart to explode, to send the boy flying like all the others. But instead, the Mustang stood still. His muscles quivered, his ears flicked back, but he did not buck. Then, with a powerful surge, Ironheart moved, not in rage, but in freedom. He galloped around the pen, hooves pounding the earth, dust rising in golden clouds. Sam clung tight, not with fear, but with trust, his body moving with the rhythm of the horse beneath him. His face was lit with awe, his eyes wide, as though he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. The crowd erupted. Cheers, shouts, even tears spilled from faces hardened by years of ranch life. Mothers clutched children, men yanked off their hats, and strangers embraced as though witnessing a miracle. The boy who should have been broken had done the impossible. On the balcony, William Harlan's grin faltered. His bourbon trembled in his glass. For the first time, the king of Silver Creek felt something he had long forgotten: doubt. As Ironheart slowed, circling the pen with his head lowered and his breath steady, Sam sat tall on his back, his hat tipped low, his heart hammering like thunder. He looked not to the crowd, not even to his mother, but straight at William Harlan. And in that gaze, in the quiet certainty of a barefoot boy on the back of a beast no man could master, the empire of arrogance began to crack. The arena had never been so silent. Dust hung in the air like smoke after a battle, suspended in golden shafts of sunlight. Sam sat astride Ironheart, with his small hands buried in the black mane, his body rising and falling with the stallion's breath. The boy's chest heaved with exhilaration, fear, and something deeper, a sense that he had crossed a line he could never return from. Around them, the crowd erupted again, waves of disbelief crashing into wild applause. A barefoot kitchen boy had done what no seasoned cowboy or bronc rider could. Mothers lifted children onto their hips to see better. Old ranchers shook their heads with tears in their eyes, muttering prayers or curses. Some shouted for William Harlan to pay up, demanding the promised fortune. Others stood speechless, their hats clenched tight in their fists. For a moment it felt as though the world had shifted, as though the laws of pride and power no longer held sway. But William Harlan was not a man to be humbled so easily. On the balcony, his silver hair gleamed in the sunlight, his jaw locked in stone fury. The bourbon glass in his hand trembled before he hurled it over the rail, shattering against the dirt below. "Enough!" he roared, his voice carrying over the applause. The crowd quieted at once, fear prickling in their spines. Sam slid from Ironheart's back and stood tall in the dust, brushing his bare feet against the earth. He looked up at the rancher, his voice steady. "You said $1 million to the man who could ride him. I rode him. Where's my money?" The crowd murmured, eager, restless. The promise had been clear, and they had witnessed the miracle. Harlan sneered, his eyes narrowing. "That wager was for men, boy. For real men who've lived and bled for this land. Not for a barefoot child hiding behind luck." Shouts rang from the crowd. Anger, disbelief, outrage. Jake Turner, his arms still bound in a sling, pushed through to the front of the fence, his voice ragged but strong. "That kid stayed on longer than any of us. He earned it fair and square." Others echoed him, their voices rising. "He won. Pay him." William raised a hand, silencing them with a glare that carried decades of dominance. "I'll not be made a fool in my own house," he snarled. "He is nothing. He has nothing. This spectacle is over." Sam's throat tightened, but he didn't back down. Ironheart moved to his side, lowering his massive head until his breath warmed the boy's shoulder. It was as though the stallion was answering, standing guard against the fury aimed at him. The image struck the crowd hard, the wildest beast in Wyoming choosing loyalty to a barefoot boy over the man who claimed to own him. "Then maybe," Sam said, his voice louder now, trembling with both fear and defiance, "you're the one who's nothing." Gasps rippled through the crowd. William's face darkened with rage, the vein in his temple pulsing. He leaned over the balcony rail, spitting his words like venom. "You dare speak to me like that? You and that animal are thieves, stealing what is mine. Leave this place before I have you both whipped from my land." The handlers moved toward the corral, ropes coiled in their hands. But Ironheart stamped the earth, teeth bared, a scream tearing from his throat that sent even seasoned ranchers stumbling back. Dust billowed around him as he stepped protectively in front of Sam. The boy reached up and laid a hand on the stallion's neck, his voice soft but steady. "Easy. We're not theirs anymore." The crowd had turned. Men and women who once cheered William now glared at him with disgust. They had seen enough cruelty, enough arrogance. One by one, voices rose in Sam's defense. "The horse chose him. That boy's got more grit than any man here. You can't deny what we all saw." William's face twisted, but for the first time in years, his authority faltered. He barked orders, but fewer men moved to obey. His own ranch hands exchanged uneasy glances, some lowering their ropes, unwilling to face the fury of Ironheart or the judgment of the crowd. Sam walked slowly toward the gate, Ironheart following close, his massive hooves thudding softly against the dirt. The crowd parted without a word, creating a path for them. Every eye watched as the boy and the stallion stepped beyond the corral, beyond the arena of William Harlan's pride. "Come back here!" William shouted, his voice breaking with desperation. "That horse is mine!" But Ironheart didn't pause. He crossed the threshold of the gate and followed Sam onto the open road, his mane catching the sunlight like a banner of freedom. The crowd erupted again, not in jeers or wagers, but in cheers that rolled across the plains like thunder. On the balcony, William stood frozen, his hand gripping the rail so hard his knuckles whitened. He had lost more than a bet. He had lost control. And deep in his chest, where arrogance had long silenced doubt, a new fear took root. Sam glanced back only once, his eyes locking with the ranchers. No words were spoken, but the message was clear. The storm William had tried to cage now belonged to no man but the boy who had listened. And as Sam and Ironheart walked into the dust side by side, the balance of power at Silver Creek shifted forever. The sun was sinking when Sam left the corral behind him. Dust curled in the fading light, glowing like smoke as the boy walked with Ironheart at his side. Every step felt like defiance, like a promise he could not yet name. The crowd trailed in stunned silence before erupting in cheers again, voices cracking with disbelief. They had seen a miracle, and miracles had a way of unsettling even the hardest skeptics. But Sam heard none of it. His focus was fixed on the ground before him and the steady rhythm of the stallion's hooves. From the porch of the great ranch house, a figure stood frozen in place. Clara Harlan, William's elder sister, clutched a linen handkerchief in her trembling fingers. She had spent years in that house, her presence overshadowed by her brother's thunderous will. Where William ruled with arrogance, Clara carried her grief in silence. The death of her daughter Elizabeth still clung to her like an old wound, tender and sharp no matter how much time had passed. Now, as she looked down at the boy in the dust, her breath caught. The shape of his shoulders, the tilt of his chin beneath that frayed straw hat. It was all achingly familiar. She pressed the handkerchief to her mouth, her eyes burning with recognition she could not yet voice. In her other hand, hidden from sight, she held a small silver locket. Its chain had long since tarnished, but inside was a faded photograph of Elizabeth, smiling in the Wyoming sun. Ironheart halted at the gate of the yard, as though he sensed the weight of unseen eyes upon them. Sam turned his head slightly, drawn by the stillness on the porch. Their gazes met. For a moment, Clara saw not just the boy, but the ghost of her daughter standing with him, her spirit woven into the lines of his face. The air between them seemed to tighten, thick with unspoken truths. William stormed out of the ranch house behind her, his voice slicing through the moment. "Get away from there, Clara. Don't you dare indulge this nonsense." His face was flushed, his silver hair catching the fire of the sunset. His fury was palpable, but Clara did not move. She stood her ground, her eyes never leaving the boy. Sam straightened his back, the exhaustion of the day hanging heavy in his limbs, but his spirit unbroken. He didn't understand the woman's tears, nor the way she clutched the locket at her chest, but he felt something stir within him, something that made him hold her gaze without fear. "Who are you?" Clara whispered, her voice breaking. No one but Sam seemed to hear. Mary Walker, who had pushed through the crowd with desperation in her eyes, finally reached her son. She gripped his arm tightly, pulling him close as though to shield him from all that had just unfolded. Her breath was ragged, her voice trembling. "Sam, we have to go. Now." But Clara's voice carried again, steadier this time. "Wait!" She stepped forward, ignoring William's bark of protest. Her shoes crunched in the gravel as she descended the steps, her eyes locked on the boy. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing something momentous. "Tell me your mother's name," she said, her words urgent, pleading. Sam glanced at his mother, confusion written across his face. Mary's lips pressed into a thin line, her body taut with resistance. For years, she had kept her past locked away, but she saw in Clara's trembling frame that silence could no longer hold. "Elizabeth," Sam said quietly, almost reluctantly. "Elizabeth Walker." Clara staggered as though struck. The locket slipped from her hand, swinging wildly on its chain. A sob tore from her throat, raw and unrestrained. "Elizabeth, my Elizabeth," she whispered, her voice cracking. She reached for Sam, her tears falling fast. "You're her boy, my grandson." The crowd erupted with murmurs, shock, awe, confusion, all tumbled together like a storm rolling across the plains. William's face drained of color, his fury replaced by something colder, more dangerous. "That boy is nothing of ours," William spat, his voice trembling with rage. "Elizabeth chose to disgrace this family when she left. She is gone, and so is her shame. Don't you dare resurrect it, Clara." But Clara was no longer the quiet shadow her brother had forced her to be. She stepped closer to Sam and Mary, her trembling hands reaching out. "No," she said fiercely, her tears glistening. "He is hers, and he is ours. And I will not let you erase him the way you tried to erase her." Sam stood frozen, his mother's hand gripping his shoulder, his mind reeling with words he barely understood. Grandson. Family. Blood. The meanings tangled inside him, heavy and disorienting. He looked at Clara, saw the truth in her eyes, and felt some piece of himself shift, like a door he hadn't known was locked, swinging open. The stallion pressed closer to Sam's side, his breath warm, his body a shield. Ironheart sensed the tension, the danger rippling in the air. The Mustang's eyes flicked from Clara's tears to William's clenched fists, and his body bristled with readiness. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the boy, the horse, the grieving woman, and the furious rancher stood suspended in the dust and twilight. It was more than a standoff. It was the unraveling of secrets long buried, the stirring of a storm that would not be contained. And though Sam didn't yet know it, the world he had lived in, small, hard, confined to shadows, was gone. In its place rose something vast and dangerous, tied not just to Ironheart, but to the blood running in his own veins. The night after the revelation hung heavy over Silver Creek Ranch. The crowd had long dispersed, murmuring in disbelief, carrying the whispers of a boy, a stallion, and a truth too powerful to remain hidden. In the quiet that followed, the ranch seemed almost smaller, the grand house dim against the sweep of the Wyoming plains. But inside its walls, storms brewed that no one could see. Sam sat on the step, outside the small cabin where he and his mother lived. The stars burned bright above him, but his gaze was fixed on the dirt beneath his bare feet. His mind replayed the words over and over. Grandson, family, blood. Each one carried weight he didn't know how to bear. His mother sat behind him in the doorway, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face pale and drawn. Clara had come earlier, her voice soft and trembling, telling stories Sam had never heard. She spoke of Elizabeth, the daughter she had lost, a woman with fire in her spirit and kindness in her hands. She had fallen in love with a man William deemed unworthy, and for that she had been cast out, stripped of her place in the family. Sam listened, his heart aching as Clara's words painted a portrait of a mother he only knew in fragments. Mary sat silent through it all, her eyes fixed on the floor. At last, when Clara's tears had dried and her voice had faltered, Mary spoke. "You don't get to rewrite history now," she said, her voice sharp with old pain. "You let him banish her. You let her die alone." Clara bowed her head, shame written in the lines of her face. "I tried to find her," she whispered. "I searched. I prayed, but William kept the gates locked and the truth buried. By the time I learned where she had gone, it was too late." Sam felt the world tilt. His fists clenched at his sides, his throat thick with anger he couldn't name. He wanted to scream, to demand why no one had saved his mother, why the people who claimed to be family had stood by while she was cast into the cold. But when he looked at Clara, he saw something rawer than guilt. He saw love, fractured and scarred, but still burning. Later, when the cabin grew quiet again, Mary finally told him the rest. She spoke of his father, a ranch hand who had known gentleness where others knew only cruelty. She told of their life after Elizabeth's death, of how she had promised to raise Sam as her own, though she had nothing to give but a roof and love. Her voice shook, her eyes glistened, but her words carried the weight of a truth Sam had long sensed. He was born of both sorrow and strength. "I didn't want you near this family," Mary said, her voice breaking. "I didn't want their shadows touching you. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe you deserve to know where you come from, even if it hurts." Sam sat in silence, Ironheart's steady breathing audible from the yard where the stallion grazed. He turned his eyes toward the Mustang, and for the first time, he felt a kinship beyond the bond they had already forged. Both of them had been trapped, caged, defined by someone else's cruelty. Both of them had been forced to carry pain that was never theirs to bear. That night, as the wind whispered across the plains, Sam dreamed of his mother. He saw her face in the stars, her laughter in the rush of the river. He dreamed of her hands brushing his hair back, her voice soft as she whispered words he could not fully hear. When he woke, the ache in his chest had grown heavier, but so had his resolve. Meanwhile, inside the grand house, Clara stood before the cold fireplace, the locket clutched in her hands. She replayed every moment of the day, every word William had spat at her, every tear she had shed. Her heart burned with memory of Elizabeth's defiance, of her laughter, of the night William's wrath had shattered everything. She swore she would not let history repeat itself. Not with Sam. And in his room upstairs, William Harlan sat at his desk, staring at the papers spread before him. His face was pale, his hand trembling slightly as he poured another glass of bourbon. The whispers of the crowd, the sight of the stallion obeying the boy, the revelation of blood ties he had tried to bury. All of it gnawed at him. But pride is a cruel master, and William's pride was older than his grief. He whispered into the glass, his voice venomous. "That boy will not take what's mine. Not him. Not anyone." The fire of memory burned in every corner of Silver Creek that night, in the heart of a boy who had just discovered his past, in the sorrow of a woman who had lost her daughter, and in the fury of a man who could not let go of his control. The stage was set, though none of them yet saw the full storm gathering beyond the horizon. The next morning dawned gray, the sky heavy with clouds that pressed low over the plains. The usual hum of the ranch, the clatter of buckets, the calls of men, the soft shuffle of livestock, was muted, as though the land itself anticipated a storm that had nothing to do with weather. Sam awoke to the sound of Ironheart pacing in the yard, his hooves striking the earth in restless rhythm. The stallion's unease seeped into Sam's bones, stirring him from dreams he could not quite remember, but which left his chest tight with longing and dread. Mary sat at the table when he came inside, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee gone cold. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion. She had not slept, and Sam knew it without asking. The truth laid bare the night before had unraveled her defenses, and though she had always seemed steady as the Wyoming earth, now she looked fragile, like glass too long under strain. Before either could speak, a knock rattled the cabin door. Clara Harlan stood on the threshold, her face pale, her locket clutched like a talisman. She looked at Sam first, then at Mary, and her voice trembled but held firm. "We need to talk. All of us." They sat around the table, the air thick with tension. Clara's words spilled out in a rush, years of silence breaking like a dam. She told Sam of Elizabeth, his mother's defiance, her laughter, her dreams too big for the cages William built around her. She spoke of the night William cast her out, his threats, his cruel declaration that she was no longer family. Clara's voice cracked as she confessed her own failure. She had not fought hard enough, had not protected the daughter who needed her most. Sam sat stiff, his fists clenched on the table. The picture of his mother that Clara painted was vivid, more alive than the fragments he held in memory, but it also deepened the ache. To know she had been loved and betrayed in equal measure, to know her blood carried both fire and sorrow. It was almost too much. Mary finally spoke, her voice cutting through Clara's grief. "And now you think you can mend it all by claiming him as your grandson, by undoing years of pain with a few words?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "No, I can't undo the past, but I won't let William erase this boy the way he erased her. He is Elizabeth's son. He is family, no matter what William says." Sam swallowed hard, his gaze flicking between them. "Family," he whispered, the word foreign on his tongue. He had lived so long as an outsider that the idea of belonging felt dangerous, like touching something too hot. The cabin door slammed open, and William Harlan strode in with 2 of his men at his back. His presence filled the small room like a storm breaking, his face lined with fury. "Enough of this nonsense," he barked, his eyes locked on Sam, cold and sharp. "That horse is mine, and so is this land. I'll not have a boy and a handful of bitter women rewriting history on my property." Clara rose, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. "He is Elizabeth's son, William. Deny it all you want, but the truth is standing right in front of you." William's jaw tightened. He turned his gaze on Mary, his voice dripping with venom. "You've poisoned him with lies, and now you parade him around as some miracle because that horse hasn't killed him yet. But make no mistake, this boy is nothing. He will take nothing from me." Ironheart's cry split the air outside, fierce and guttural. The stallion had pressed close to the cabin, his dark head visible through the window, ears pinned, eyes blazing. He sensed the tension, the threat in William's voice, and his body bristled with fury. One of the hired men shifted nervously, stepping back from the door. Sam stood then, his body trembling but his voice unshaken. You can say I'm nothing. You can take your money, your land, your pride, but you can't take him from me. Ironheart chose me, and maybe you don't understand what that means, but I do. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. William's face twisted, but the weight of the boy's words, coupled with the stallion's scream outside, unsettled even him. He turned sharply on his heel and stormed out, his men scrambling to follow. Clara exhaled, her hands pressed to her chest. Mary closed her eyes, exhaustion heavy on her shoulders. Sam stood in the middle of it all, the truth of his blood burning in his veins. He was Elizabeth's son. He was the boy who had ridden the unrideable. And whether William accepted it or not, the world was beginning to see what he truly was. The truth had been unveiled, and nothing at Silver Creek would ever be the same again. The following day dawned brighter than it had any right to. The clouds of yesterday had blown east, leaving a sky so blue it almost mocked the tension still simmering at Silver Creek Ranch. Word of the boy and the stallion had traveled fast. By mid-morning, strangers poured into the yard, neighbors from distant counties, reporters with notepads and cameras, and men who had once feared William Harlan, but now came to see him falter. The weight of so many eyes pressed against the grand house like an unspoken judgment. Sam stood near the fence, Ironheart at his side, his straw hat tilted low to shield his eyes. The stallion was restless, his ears flicking, his breath heavy, but he stayed close to the boy, as though tethered by something stronger than rope. People gathered in a wide circle, their murmurs rising into waves. Sam could feel their gazes, the mixture of awe and disbelief, but he kept his focus on the steady warmth of the horse beside him. The crunch of tires on gravel drew every eye to the drive. A black car rolled in, its paint gleaming against the dust of the yard. From it stepped a man in a dark suit, his posture precise, his briefcase tucked neatly under one arm. His name was Samuel Roberts, a lawyer from Cheyenne, and his presence alone made William stiffen at the porch rail. The sight of him was a reminder that the power William had always wielded so effortlessly was not as absolute as he pretended. Roberts removed his hat, nodding politely to the gathered crowd before speaking in a voice that carried like a bell. "My name is Samuel Roberts. I've come to Silver Creek on behalf of the late Thomas Harlan, father of Mr. William and Mrs. Clara Harlan. It is my duty to read a portion of his last will and testament, one that concerns this ranch and the conduct of its heirs." A ripple moved through the crowd. Clara stepped forward, her face pale but determined, her hands clasped tightly at her waist. William's knuckles whitened against the porch railing. He forced a laugh, but it sounded thin. "This is absurd. My father's been gone 10 years. Whatever business he had is long since settled." Roberts shook his head slowly, drawing a folded document from his case. "Not all of it. Your father was a man who believed in legacy, in the honor of his family name, and he foresaw what pride and prejudice could do to that name. He included a clause, one that activates in the event of actions deemed to dishonor this family by means of cruelty or discrimination." The words landed like stones in still water. The crowd leaned closer, their breath caught. William's smile faltered. Roberts continued, his tone unwavering. "The clause states that if any heir of Thomas Harlan should commit such acts, the ownership of Silver Creek Ranch will immediately pass to the next heir deemed worthy, specifically his daughter Clara Harlan." Gasps echoed across the yard. Clara's eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. William went rigid, his face flushing crimson. "Lies," he hissed. "All lies. You've been duped, Clara. This is a trick." But Roberts held the document high, the seal and signatures plain for all to see. "This is no trick. Witnesses signed it, and now the witnesses stand before you." He gestured to several older ranchers at the edge of the crowd, men who had known Thomas, men who nodded gravely. One stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "We were there, William. We heard your father speak the words. He feared what your pride might do. And today, we've all seen those fears come true." Murmurs swelled into angry voices. The people who had once bowed their heads in William's presence now raised them high. They spoke of his arrogance, his cruelty, the way he had cast Elizabeth out, the way he had denied Sam even after the boy had proven himself in front of everyone. Each word stripped another layer from William's authority. Sam stood still, his chest tight. He had never imagined the world of lawyers and wills, of legacies written in ink. But as the voices rose, he understood that this moment was bigger than him, bigger than even Ironheart. It was about justice, for his mother, for the land, for every soul William had crushed under his pride. William lunged down the steps, his finger stabbing toward Roberts. "You'll regret this, every one of you. This ranch is mine. Always has been, always will be." But Clara stepped forward, her voice ringing clear. "No, William, it was ours, and you poisoned it with hate. But it won't be yours anymore, not after today." The crowd erupted in cheers, in shouts of agreement, in cries of long-suppressed anger. William staggered back, the ground shifting beneath him, as though the very soil had rejected him. For the first time, he looked small against the backdrop of the ranch he had once ruled. Sam felt Ironheart's breath against his shoulder, steady and warm. He reached up and touched the stallion's mane, his heart steadying. The boy who had been nothing, who had grown up barefoot in the dust, was now at the center of a truth too great to ignore. The lawyer closed the document, his words final. "By the will of Thomas Harlan, Silver Creek now belongs to Clara Harlan, and to the legacy she chooses to protect." The crowd thundered, their cheers rolling across the plains like distant thunder. William turned away, his face pale, his steps uneven. The kingdom he had built on arrogance was collapsing, and no amount of money or power could save it now. In the silence that followed, Clara's eyes found Sam's. Tears glistened as she whispered, too soft for anyone but him to hear, "Your mother would be proud." And for the first time, Sam felt the truth of belonging settle into his bones, not as a burden, but as a promise. The news spread faster than wildfire on the Wyoming wind. By the next sunrise, the road to Silver Creek Ranch was alive with footsteps, wagon wheels, and the low growl of engines. Men in work-stained denim came from their fields, women with weary eyes brought their children, and ranch hands from neighboring spreads rode in on horses still damp with morning sweat. Word had gone out. William Harlan's reign over Silver Creek was broken, and the people wanted to see it for themselves. Sam stood near the barn, his straw hat tugged low against the sun. Ironheart close by his side. The Mustang stood tall, his black coat gleaming, his eyes sharp as fire. He seemed to know the weight of the moment, his stance proud and steady as though he had been waiting for this gathering all his life. The people flocked toward him and the boy, murmurs rising like waves. They looked at Sam not as the kitchen boy they once passed without notice, but as someone different now, someone who had touched the untouchable and faced down the arrogance of a man who had crushed them for years. Clara emerged from the house, her back straight though her hands trembled. For decades, she had lived in her brother's shadow, her voice silenced, her grief hidden. Now she stood before the crowd, her locket glinting against her chest, her eyes shining with both sorrow and resolve. She raised her hands, and the voices stilled. "Silver Creek was meant to be a place of pride," she said, her voice carrying clear across the yard. "My father built it with his hands, and he dreamed it would be a legacy of strength and honor. But William turned it into a kingdom of fear. He cast out my daughter Elizabeth when she chose love over his pride, and he denied this boy, her son, the place that was rightfully his. No more." A sudden murmur of agreement surged through the crowd. Faces that had long borne the weight of William's arrogance now lifted with hope. A rancher from the edge of the county stepped forward, his weathered hands gripping his hat. "We've lived under his thumb too long. He raised prices, underpaid wages, and drove families off land their fathers had worked for generations. If this ranch is to change, we'll stand with you." Others echoed him. A woman with lines of hardship carved deep into her cheeks spoke of the debt William had forced her family into. An older hand told of beatings handed out to workers who dared question orders. Each story built upon the last, painting a portrait of cruelty that no one could deny. Sam listened, his chest tightening with every word. He had known William was cruel, but to hear how deeply his reach had scarred so many lives was a revelation. The crowd's anger was not only for him and Ironheart, but for years of wounds left untreated. Then William appeared. He stepped onto the porch with his boots polished and his vest buttoned sharp, as though he could stitch his authority back together with appearances alone. His silver hair gleamed, but his face was ashen, his eyes hard. The crowd fell silent, watching him as one might watch a snake slithering through dry grass. "You think you can take this from me?" he thundered, his voice still heavy with command. "This land is mine, my blood, my sweat, my right. You've all prospered under me, whether you admit it or not. And now you'd turn against me for a barefoot boy and a wild beast." The words might once have cowed them, but not today. Jake Turner, his arms still bound in a sling, pushed to the front. His voice was ragged, but it carried with the force of truth. "We saw it, William. Every last one of us. That boy rode the horse no man could, and you denied him, spat on him, called him nothing. But he's more of a man than you'll ever be." The crowd roared in agreement, voices rising like thunder rolling across the plains. William's face twisted, his authority unraveling thread by thread. He shouted again, but the words were drowned in the surge of voices. "Justice for Sam! Ironheart chose him. No more Harlan lies." Clara stepped forward, her hand raised once more. "This ranch is not William's anymore. By our father's will, by the law, and by the truth standing before us, Silver Creek belongs to me, and to the future we choose to build together." The cheer that followed shook the earth. Hats flew into the air, children laughed, and tears streaked down faces hardened by years of toil. Sam stood stunned, his hand resting against Ironheart's warm neck, as strangers pressed closer, not with mockery, but with reverence. They touched his shoulder, nodded at him with respect, whispered blessings into the dust. For the first time in his life, he felt the full weight of belonging, not just to a family, but to a people. William stood, frozen, the voices of defiance ringing in his ears. His power had always depended on their silence. and now their silence was gone. He looked small against the sea of faces, his fists clenched, his jaw tight, but even he knew the tide had turned. Sam lifted his gaze, meeting the eyes of the crowd. He was still a boy, barefoot and uncertain, but with Ironheart at his side and the truth of his blood burning in his chest, he felt something stronger than fear. For the first time, he believed in the possibility of a future not chained to someone else's pride, but built on courage, loyalty, and freedom. The people had risen, and nothing could push them back down again. The morning after the crowd's uprising carried with it a strange calm, the kind that follows a storm, yet still leaves the air charged. The yard of Silver Creek was quiet, but the silence was no longer William Harlan's to command. It belonged to the people who had gathered and spoken, to the voices that had broken free. The echo of their cheers still clung to the land like the scent of rain after lightning. Sam awoke before dawn, as he always did, but this time, the world felt different. He stepped outside barefoot, his straw hat tilted back, and found Ironheart grazing near the fence. The stallion lifted his head when the boy approached, ears flicking, eyes warm but sharp. For the first time, Sam did not see defiance burning there. He saw strength, tempered by trust. He placed his hand against the horse's neck, and the stallion leaned into it, a gesture of kinship that needed no words. Mary emerged from the cabin, her face drawn with both pride and worry. She carried a folded blanket in her hands, pressing it to her chest as though it were armor. "Sam," she said softly, "this isn't over. William won't let go so easily." Sam nodded. He knew it. He could feel it in the stillness of the ranch, the way shadows seemed to hang heavier around the grand house. But he also felt something else, the weight of his own choice. He had stood against William, and he had not faltered. That strength, however fragile it felt, was his to carry now. Later that morning, Clara called a meeting in the open yard. Neighbors and ranch hands gathered once more, though the crowd was smaller now, weary but resolute. Clara spoke firmly, her grief and guilt replaced by determination. "Silver Creek belongs to us all," she declared. "It will no longer be ruled by fear or arrogance. It will be a place of fairness, a place where the land is respected and the people are honored." The words struck deep, and the crowd murmured in approval. But when Clara looked at Sam, her eyes shone with a truth unspoken. "This boy reminded us of what courage looks like," she said. "And he reminded us that freedom cannot be bought or forced. It must be chosen." Sam shifted uncomfortably, the attention heavy on his shoulders, but Ironheart stepped closer, pressing his muzzle against the boy's shoulder, if to steady him. The crowd cheered softly at the sight, their belief not just in the boy, but in the bond that had changed everything. That afternoon, William appeared at the edge of the yard. His presence was quieter now, stripped of the arrogance that once preceded him. He looked smaller, his clothes rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, but his voice still carried venom. "You think this is finished? You think a mob and a piece of paper can take my land? You'll regret this, all of you." No one answered. The people no longer bowed their heads at his fury. Instead, they turned their eyes to Sam, to Clara, to one another. William's power had drained away, not with force, but with rejection. He spat into the dirt, his fists clenched, before storming back toward the house. His footsteps faded, but the unease lingered. That night, Sam sat by the fence with Ironheart, the sky ablaze with stars. He whispered into the quiet, words meant only for the stallion's ears. "I don't care about the money. I don't care about the land. All I want is for you to be free, for us to be free." Ironheart shifted, lowering his great head until his breath warmed the boy's face. Sam felt a rush of something deeper than pride, stronger than fear. It was belonging, not to a family name or a piece of land, but to a bond forged in trust. The stallion's strength had become his own, and his resolve had settled like iron in his chest. Mary watched from the cabin porch, her eyes misted, her hands clasped tight. Clara stood beside her, the locket gleaming at her throat, and whispered, "Elizabeth would be proud. She always believed love was stronger than hate." For the first time in years, Mary allowed herself to nod. She saw it too. The truth carried in the way the boy leaned into the horse, the way the Mustang guarded him as though the two were one. Strength was not in owning, not in conquering, but in choosing freedom and protecting it. The land stretched vast and silent around them, and though danger still lurked in William's shadow, Sam felt unafraid. He had stood in the storm, and he had not been broken. Now he knew why. Some storms exist not to destroy, but to reveal what cannot be caged. And Ironheart, wild and unyielding, was proof that freedom, once claimed, could never again be taken. The sun rose over Silver Creek in a blaze of gold, spilling light across the wide Wyoming plains. The air was sharp and clean, carrying with it the scent of dew-soaked grass and distant sage. For the first time in years, the ranch did not feel like a place of fear or arrogance. It felt like a land holding its breath, waiting for the promise of something new. Sam stood in the yard with Ironheart at his side, his straw hat tilted against the morning light. The stallion's coat gleamed like black steel, his mane tossing in the breeze. Together they faced the horizon, where the sky met the endless stretch of earth. The boy felt the weight of everything that had happened. The challenges, the revelations, the fury of William, and the uprising of the people. Yet beneath the weight, he felt something stronger: freedom. Clara joined them, her locket catching the light as she rested a hand gently on Sam's shoulder. Her voice was quiet, meant only for him. Elizabeth would have been proud. She dreamed of a life where love mattered more than pride. You've given her that, Sam. Tears glistened in her eyes, but they were no longer only of sorrow. They carried hope. Mary stepped closer, her face tired, but softer than it had been in years. She had carried the burden of loss, of silence, of raising a boy with no place in the world. Now she saw her son standing tall beside the Mustang who had chosen him, and she realized he had found his place after all. "Whatever comes," she said, her voice steady, "you'll never face it alone." In the distance, the crowd began to gather again. Neighbors, ranchers, and families came not for spectacle this time, but to stand witness to a beginning. They cheered not for money or wagers, but for the boy and the stallion who had changed everything. Some cried, some smiled, but all carried the sense that they were part of something larger than themselves. William Harlan was nowhere to be seen. His house still stood tall at the center of the ranch, but its shadow had lifted. He had walked away the night before, his figure swallowed by the dust of his own bitterness. The land no longer bowed to him. The people no longer feared him. He had become a stranger on the soil he once ruled. Sam placed his hand on Ironheart's neck, the bond between them as sure as the earth beneath their feet. He didn't crave the fortune that had started it all, nor the power of the ranch now promised to Clara. What he wanted was simpler, truer. "We'll work," he whispered, his words carried on the morning wind. "We'll take care of this land. We'll make it ours, not by owning it, but by honoring it." Ironheart tossed his head, snorting as if in agreement. His hooves struck the dirt with steady rhythm, a sound that echoed like a heartbeat across the yard. Clara lifted her face to the sky. Mary clasped her hands. The people around them cheered, their voices rising like a hymn carried on the wind. And Sam, still just a boy with bare feet and a patched shirt, felt a dignity settle over him greater than any fortune could bring. The stallion reared, his cry piercing the morning, rolling across the plains in defiance and triumph. It was not the scream of a beast caged, but the song of freedom claimed. Sam held tight, his face lit with wonder, and for a moment it seemed as if the entire world rose with them. As Ironheart's hooves struck the earth once more, Sam looked out at the horizon, at the land that stretched farther than he could see. A smile touched his lips. This was not an ending. It was the beginning of a story that would live long beyond him, a story of courage, of truth, and of a bond no one could break. And so, under the wide sky of Wyoming, a boy and a wild Mustang began a new dawn, together. And now it's your turn. If Ironheart's story touched you, drop a simple 0 or 1 in the comments to let me know you're here. Don't forget to hit subscribe, because the next story will take you even deeper into the unbreakable bond between people and animals. You won't want to miss it.